He can be replaced anytime. Chris had used me, looked down on me, and scolded me. My pride was in shambles. But one day, a turning point came, and my situation changed. Starting today, I've been appointed the new CEO. What? Chris, the manager who always looked down on me, boasted about becoming the next CEO and strutted around arrogantly, unlike me, who quietly did my job. But his time was running out. Soon, I'll bring him back to reality. So completely that he won't be able to recover. I'll make him regret all the suffering he's caused me. I am Jack Moore, a single, dedicated businessman. Working for a local company, Sons Corporation, I lead a busy life. Since joining the company, I've worked diligently without complaining, and now I'm in my mid-40s. With more young employees joining and getting promoted one after another. I paid no attention to promotions and just focused on my work. Some people ask if I have any hobbies outside of work, but to me, work is like a hobby. A workaholic. I've been called that, but I take it as a compliment. Colleagues, subordinates, and even bosses often rely on me if they have any issues. Whether it's work problems or interpersonal relationships, I believe it's my job to listen and guide them to solutions. Creating a better work environment for everyone is also important. I'm not exactly a behind-the-scenes hero, but if it's for the company, I'm satisfied with that. One day, a man named Chris came from the headquarters. I'm Chris, the manager who will soon become this company's president. Things won't be the same now that I'm here. Prepare to be driven hard. Chris, who is a decade younger than me, is already a manager. It seems the company has high expectations for him. Maybe that's why he can even claim he'll become the president. Listen to the future president's orders properly, otherwise, I'll put you on the fast track to being laid off. Unlike me, he has momentum and a strong presence that pulls everyone along. However, his attitude and words feel completely off. But my work doesn't change. I'll just keep doing the tasks given to me, as always. But Chris didn't approve of that. Hey old man, is this all you can do? Just things anyone could do? No, I'm just doing my job. How is that a job? Even a kid could do that. You're no better than a salary thief. He made snide remarks about my work. It was the first time anyone had said such things to me, and I couldn't help but pause. Look around. Everyone here is younger than you and eager for promotions. When there's someone who can't do the job, it kills everyone's motivation. Just get out of here. Why did he have to say so much on our first meeting? I was just doing my job as usual. Chris would also loudly mock me whenever he had the chance. He called me incompetent, a hindrance, and unnecessary for the company. It was no longer just snide remarks, but outright abuse. Other employees avoided making eye contact with Chris, fearing they'd become his next target. Everyone must have thought the same thing. An awful man had joined the team. From that day on, Chris constantly belittled and reprimanded me. Oh, it stinks in here. This department reeks of old man smell. It's unbearable. No wonder no one can concentrate on work. This kind of task should have been finished yesterday. Stop making me so angry. If you can't do your job properly, we don't need you here. Pack up and get out. Since Chris's arrival, this kind of abuse happened daily, and a dark shadow began to fall over my heart. Even my co-workers started looking at me with disdain. I just took it all without saying anything back. The juniors who looked up to me, my colleagues, and even my boss, all nodded at Chris's words and gave me cold looks. I became afraid to make eye contact with anyone, and everyone at the company became a source of fear. I grew paranoid, wondering if they were bad-mouthing me behind my back. Before I knew it, I couldn't even walk in front of people anymore, and I started to distance myself from others. Naturally, this affected my work, and mistakes piled up. Chris took every opportunity to reprimand me. Each time, my heart would race and sweat would pour from my forehead. Don't spill your filth and dirty the company. At this point, you're just a piece of junk. He said this with a laugh. And I could hear others snickering too. Chris claimed he would train me to be competent and dumped a massive workload on me. While everyone else left on time, I was the only one working late. By the time I finally finished and left the office, it was past 9 p.m. On my usual way home, I passed by a small park that I usually just walk past. This time, I felt drawn to a bench and sat down. With a deep sigh, tears began to flow. At that moment, an elderly man approached me. "You okay?" At this hour, anyone in the park must be homeless. I wanted to be alone. I was about to hand him some money to make him leave, but instead, the old man sat beside me and offered me a handkerchief. The handkerchief was well worn and had holes in it. "Thank you." I wiped my tears with the handkerchief. I thought he would ask what happened, but he just sat there quietly, watching the scenery with me. Then he slowly stood up. "I'm meeting my wife now. See you again," he said and walked away. Clutching the old man's handkerchief, I headed home. My apartment is about a 30-minute walk from the company. When I got to my apartment, I thought about the old man. He seemed to be in his 70s, with white hair, a gentle demeanor, and a kind voice. He was very calm and composed. Who could he be? Looking at the handkerchief, there was nothing to reveal anything about the old man. I wonder if I'll see him again, I muttered to myself. A month passed, and I started meeting the old man regularly. At the same time and in the same park as before. I thought it would be rude to ask too many personal questions, so I didn't. The old man, named Charles Anderson, was in his 70s and still working, though not in a traditional office setting. It must be tough for someone in their 70s to work physically demanding jobs. Health is the most important thing, after all. Health is important, but I never thought it was tough. I love my current job. Seeing Mr. Anderson talk so happily made me look down involuntarily. "Do you dislike your job?" "I like it, but right now, I hate it." I told Mr. Anderson about everything that had happened to me. I told him how I've always been the most dedicated to my work, that this company is very important to me, and I want to repay it through my work. But when my boss Chris arrived, all my efforts seemed meaningless. Every word he said made me feel more frustrated, and I was on the verge of tears. Mr. Anderson, who had been listening silently, slowly began to speak. "I can deeply understand your feelings, your passion and sincerity for your work, and your love for the company. For the past month, Chris had been dumping a massive amount of work on me under the guise of training. As a result, working on weekends and overtime became the norm." Mr. Anderson continued speaking to me as I looked down. "He's a terrible boss. I've worked hard up until now, but it's time to end it. Are you quitting?" I didn't respond to Mr. Anderson's question. I checked the time on my watch. "I should be going. I'm sorry for burdening you with my troubles." "It's a shame. I think you're indispensable to the company." Mr. Anderson's words made me feel momentarily confused. "I'm not that kind of person," I muttered softly and left. When I got to my apartment, I plopped down on the sofa. I remembered Mr. Anderson's words. "I'm not that kind of person." I sat up and placed a piece of paper on the table. It was my resignation letter. I had written it a week after Chris arrived. At the time, I never thought I would actually submit it. But now things were different. I had made up my mind to quit. If Chris hadn't come, this wouldn't be happening. The next day, my resignation letter was in my bag. It was my last day at work. "Good morning, manager. Do you have a moment? I need to talk to you." "What is it? Are you quitting?" Chris responded nonchalantly. "Is that so? Finally made up your mind? I've been eagerly waiting for you to leave." He extended his hand with a big grin, urging me to hand over the resignation letter, as I pulled the letter from my bag. "There are plenty of replacements for incompetents like you," Chris said. Hearing his words, a surge of anger welled up from deep within me. Who does he think caused all this? I clenched my fist tightly. I will never forgive him. At least one punch to this man's face. At that moment, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Hey, it's annoying. I stepped into the hallway to answer the call and was shocked to find out who was on the other end. The person on the phone asked me to come to a certain place immediately. Right now, but... I hesitated and turned around to find Chris behind me. You're not part of this company anymore. Get lost. If I stayed any longer and he said anything more, I might really lose control. Thank you for everything. As I left those words behind, I left the company. I headed straight to the meeting place mentioned on the call. It was the small park. Not here yet. I sat on the usual bench and closed my eyes. Everything that had happened so far flashed through my mind. I had just left the company I worked for so long. No regrets. I kept telling myself this was for the best. You don't look like someone who just quit. Are you having second thoughts? Mr. Anderson. I was supposed to arrive earlier, but I needed some time to prepare. The person on the phone was Mr. Anderson. I just got here too, but Mr. Anderson, what's with the outfit? This. Mr. Anderson was dressed in a high-end suit, looking like a completely different person. I didn't mean to surprise you, but I thought it was necessary for your sake. I couldn't understand what he meant, and then Mr. Anderson said something unbelievable. It left me speechless. The next day, even though I had just quit my job, I found myself heading back to the company. Normally, this would be ridiculous. But this wasn't a normal situation. I had no idea what was going to happen next. When I arrived at the company, got out of the car and walked inside, the employees looked at me with surprise and started whispering. Then my nemesis, Chris, arrived at work. What? Jack. Good morning. What are you doing here? You quit, so get lost. Just seeing Chris made my body tense up. I'm sorry, but it's you who should be leaving. What did you say? Mr. Anderson, who was behind me, interjected sharply. I saw you earlier talking to the receptionist. This isn't the place for that. You seem to think this is a bar or something. What did you say, you? Chris, showing his anger, stormed toward Mr. Anderson with a furious expression. Seeing this, I hurriedly stepped between them. Please stop. You useless idiot. Stay out of my way. Chris shifted his target to me and grabbed my collar tightly. Don't get cocky, you. At that moment, he noticed the suit I was wearing, and his expression changed. Why are you wearing such a high-end luxury suit? A president should dress appropriately, and your way of speaking is far from commendable. What, president? Mr. Anderson looked at me and nodded deeply. Effective today, he's been appointed the new president. What? Didn't you hear? This is the new president of the company, Mr. Jack Moore. Chris seemed unable to comprehend what was happening. It was understandable. The subordinate he looked down on just yesterday was now standing before him as the president. You've got to be kidding. Why is someone like him the new president? I'm the one who deserves to be president. The fact that you're claiming to be suitable for the role reveals your true character. What did you say? Oh, did I hurt that high pride of yours? I haven't said anything wrong. Chris's face turned bright red. Mr. Anderson, let's stop here. And Manager Chris. Jack, you. Wake up already. Your arrogant attitude and words are driving people away and causing significant losses to the company. Losses? Why would I be responsible for that? Recently, the company's performance had been declining. And it started when Chris arrived. Why did this happen? The reason is simple. Chris looked down on everyone and treated them like they were beneath him. He acted as if he were the most important person. The employees who worked in that environment grew to despise it, which lowered their motivation. As a result, the company's profits gradually declined. Well, even if I didn't. As a manager, it's your responsibility to keep track of the company's profits daily. Not doing so is inexcusable. It's equivalent to abandoning your duties. I'm not at fault. It's all those incompetent people. He's the typical example of someone who can't see his own faults. To Chris, it's always someone else's responsibility. Mr. Anderson sighed deeply. Talking to him is pointless. President Jack, he must be held accountable. We should decide on his punishment at the next board meeting. Yes, that's a good idea. Right after Chris apologized. I'm so sorry. I'll make sure this never happens again and will speak to everyone about it, please. Don't punish me. Even if you stay, you won't change. That's evident from your past behavior. Accept it. Chris was left stunned and defeated. President Jack, you must be exhausted on your first day. This will change the atmosphere in the company and naturally restore everyone's motivation. I never expected such a situation on my first day as president. But in the end, it was for the best for everyone and the company. Mr. Anderson spoke with satisfaction. But one thing still bothered me. Why me? Why, you ask? There must have been others more suitable for the role of president than me. So why? Mr. Anderson narrowed his white-haired eyebrows. We had decided to welcome you as president for a long time. It was my wife's strong wish. Your wife's? Mr. Anderson began to speak slowly about the past. It was about 50 years ago. At that time, newlywed Mr. Anderson was running around to start a company, and at the age of 20, he established Sons Corporation. With a small team, they gradually expanded the company, increasing staff with new graduates and mid-career hires, and 30 years later, it had grown into a company with over 500 employees. They had set up headquarters in the city and were about to develop further when it happened. My wife had always been physically weak. She couldn't go out, let alone work. I see. But what did your wife do when you started the company? I was always by her side. Mr. Anderson worked as the president while always being by his wife's side. Since establishing Sons Corporation, I left all on-site work to other employees and worked from home. So, although I am the president, I've never shown my face at the company. Only a few top executives know what I look like. No wonder I had never seen him before. I had heard there was a president, but I had never seen his face since I joined the company. People around called me the ghost president. Mr. Anderson laughed as he spoke, but his eyes looked lonely. It was just when we were about to expand. My wife's health worsened. When I turned 50, my wife passed away. The sorrow of losing his wife led Mr. Anderson to overwork himself. And eventually, the strain took its toll on his body. Even working from home, my body couldn't handle the stress. He cut back on sleep and handled all the work by himself. The burden was immense. Mr. Anderson shared these memories slowly. After losing my wife, my body and mind were not in good shape. I should have known that pushing myself would only make things worse. It's pathetic. In that case, shouldn't you have appointed someone else as president earlier? Why wait until now? Mr. Anderson began to explain why he chose me as the president. It all started when I told my wife about you before she passed away. At that time, I had just graduated high school and wanted to work instead of going to college. I was never interested in academics and was eager to start working. Then I heard about a job fair by Sons Corporation, a popular real estate company, and immediately applied. The person in charge explained everything very clearly and thoroughly. I felt that the company had a bright future, and so did my own future if I worked there. I decided on the spot that I would work for this company. I submitted my resume that day and passed the interview. Since then, I've dedicated myself to this company. Mr. Anderson heard about this from other senior executives and became interested. At the time, you were only 20, but your diligent attitude and ability to harmonize with others stood out. I found myself genuinely impressed by you. I never knew I was so highly regarded. But it was my wife's comment that solidified my decision to make you president. When I told her about you, she smiled and said you would be a perfect fit for the next president. Seeing her smile, I realized she was right, and I made up my mind. Is that so? So, please don't say you're not suitable. You are undoubtedly the right person to be president. I feel a renewed sense of responsibility. Just as I finished speaking and invited Mr. Anderson to go, I heard a faint voice from behind. You'll pay for this. When I quickly turned around, Chris, who had been silent until now, was charging at me with a furious expression. You Chris's scream echoed loudly in the lobby. But in the next moment, no. Chris was tackled to the floor by a nearby security guard. Even then, Chris kept shouting, "Let go." I slowly approached him and grabbed his face firmly. "Enough already." My voice echoed through the lobby. "Do you know how many people wanted to quit the company since you arrived? Every time, I convinced them to stay. If I hadn't, you'd be the only one left in the sales department by now, and you could have destroyed the company's future too." Seeing me furious for the first time, Chris was completely deflated. "Everything I said is true. You caused a decline in sales, and you will be held accountable." Chris, looking devastated, was led away by the security guards, who held him by the arms. Chris was taken away by the security guards, severely reprimanded, and then released. The next day, after discussions with the top executives, Chris was fired due to his past behavior and significant drop in profits. Mr. Anderson informed me that Chris, unable to find a job, is now living on the streets. Despite earning so much, he has no savings and scavenges food from restaurant trash cans to survive. With his high pride, Chris is unlikely to succeed in any future job. Regardless, a bright future does not seem possible for Chris. As for me, since becoming president, my days have been busier than ever. Although my days are filled with work, this busy lifestyle is perfect for someone like me, whose hobby is work. Of course, there are many things I don't understand, and sometimes I feel lost, but there's always someone reliable to help. "President, you seem tired. Is there something troubling you?" "It's a very special person's birthday today, and I don't know which place to book. Do you have any recommendations?" "In that case, how about the small park near the company? It would be a perfect place for some nostalgic conversations." "Let's go with that. We'll reminisce about old times." Celebrating a birthday in a small park. I want to cherish this relationship moving forward. "It was a trash system. I'm returning it. Give me my money back." With just a glance at the system under quality check, Chris Wilson, the general contractor's boss, declared it trash. At that moment, the tension I had been feeling snapped. "All right, let's pretend it never happened." Following Chris's wish, I deleted the system from the server. Despite working hard to improve the system, why do I have to endure this treatment? After Chris left the company, I received incessant calls from him 3 days later. "Hey, you, do something about this. What are you talking about all of a sudden?" Hearing Chris's panicked voice made me laugh from the depths of my stomach. "It's a disaster because you deleted the system. Get to our company right away." This was the moment to settle everything and make Chris apologize. I walked through the company's entrance feeling like a hero going into battle. "I am Mike Taylor, a 42-year-old system engineer. I am responsible for developing and designing computer systems that clients need. Since I've always liked machines, I found the work of an engineer fulfilling. The time spent facing the computer and working diligently every day is comforting. I was dedicated to completing the tasks ordered by the prime contractor company meticulously. This project involved building a sales management and ordering system for a hair salon in New York. I teamed up with my colleague, Joseph Anderson, to tackle this project. Joseph is bright and has strong communication skills, unlike me. For someone like me who struggles with communication, having Joseph around is reassuring. Let's do our best again this time. Yeah, let's make something great." Joseph was fully motivated, focusing on the monitor. Just as I hoped to continue working in this enthusiastic environment, a phone call brought me back to reality. It was Chris Wilson, the sales manager of the prime contractor company. Chris was promoted to sales manager about 2 months ago. He is forceful and often doesn't read the room, frequently displaying arrogance towards subcontractors. Lacking confidence in interpersonal relationships and being inarticulate. It seems I've caught Chris's attention. Every time we meet, he makes sarcastic remarks about my gloomy face. If he's calling me, he probably wants to make another sarcastic remark. Bracing myself for his sharp words, I reluctantly answered the phone. Hey, you're doing well, right? You should be grateful I got this contract for you. Chris's intimidating opening line made my stomach tighten. Usually, sales department employees handle these things, but this time, Chris is directly overseeing us. Well, the work has just started, so I can't say much yet. Chris let out a big sigh and yelled at me, as my voice naturally shrank in fear. What a pathetic voice. Can't you even thank me? If this causes any trouble for the client and leads to damages, you'll be responsible. Be prepared. Even after the call ended, my heart was still pounding, but as I turned back to the screen and started typing, I began to regain my composure. Joseph looked at me with concern, but I nodded to show I was okay. However, my hope to complete this project smoothly was crushed by Chris's constant interference. A month of relentless work passed as we had multiple meetings with the client to build the hair salon sales management and ordering system. Typically, it's the sales team's job to carefully listen to the client's needs. But calling Chris for inquiries was pointless. Can't you just ask them yourself? I'm busy. I understood that Chris had other responsibilities as the manager. If you're too busy, can you assign someone else? Meeting with the client isn't part of my job. When I said this clearly, Chris yelled furiously over the phone. Change the person in charge. Who do you think you are? Talking like that when you're just a subcontractor. I can cancel the contract anytime. For a moment, I thought it might be better for my sanity if the contract were cancelled. However, after a month of meetings and understanding the client's needs, I couldn't just quit for my own convenience. Joseph, who had worked hard with me, would be disappointed if I quit. Though I felt anger at Chris's unreasonable behavior, I swallowed it down. I'm sorry. Good. We have 2 months until the deadline, so do your job properly. After the call ended, Joseph spoke to me as I slumped in my chair. All we can do is make a great system. Let's show Chris he's wrong after this. Yeah, you're right. For the next 2 months, we worked against the clock, deeply considering what the client wanted from the system. As the system neared completion, having overcome numerous specification changes and tests, the goal was finally in sight. While we were fixing bugs and summarizing support policies, Chris, who had mostly communicated by phone, suddenly appeared in our office. Isn't it done yet? You're dragging your feet. The deadline is near. Chris threw his bag on the floor and shook his body, not hiding his irritation. We're testing to ensure the system works correctly. We're not dragging our feet. Testing the system for proper functionality is crucial, but Chris is just pressuring us to finish quickly. Let me see. I know enough about systems. Chris grinned and looked at the monitor, then suddenly said something unbelievable. It's a trash system. I'm returning it. Give me my money back. With just a glance at the system under quality check, Chris declared it trash, snapping the tension I'd been feeling. I'd always been intimidated by Chris, but at this point, I didn't care anymore. All right, let's pretend it never happened. Although the system took over 3 months to build, including design, I deleted it from the server as Chris wanted. I could make something like this myself. You subcontractors act so high and mighty, but you're no longer needed. Chris walked away in high spirits, thinking he was done with us, as Joseph and I watched him leave. We had worked hard to make the system great, so why did we deserve this treatment? I clenched my fists tightly, considering my next steps. I came up with an idea, patted Joseph on the shoulder, who was biting his lip in frustration, and said, "This is where the real fight begins. I need your help, Joseph." Joseph, eyes wide open, nodded enthusiastically at my suggestion and quickly turned to the computer. 3 days after Chris left the company, he started calling me incessantly. I ignored it for a while, but the constant ringing forced me to answer reluctantly. Hey, you, fix this. What are you talking about? As expected, Chris's voice was frantic, which made me laugh from deep within. Everything's a mess because you deleted the system. Get to our company now. Joseph and I headed to Chris's company, which was 2 train stops away from ours. We were determined to settle everything and make Chris apologize. I felt like a hero going into battle as I walked through the company's entrance. In the lobby, Johnson, the president of the prime contractor company, was pacing with a pale face. Seeing our faces, his eyes narrowed angrily, indicating his fury. "Are you the 2 Chris mentioned? Come to the president's office." It was unprecedented for Johnson to personally lead us to the president's office. The employees in the lobby were murmuring, and I felt uneasy. Joseph, gripping his bag tightly, patted my shoulder to calm me. In the president's office, Chris was there. Contrary to his usual arrogant expression, he looked weary and furrowed his brow. Johnson gestured for Joseph and me to sit on the sofa, then glared at Chris. "Chris, explain the situation to them again." "Yes." Chris, wiping the sweat from his broad forehead with a handkerchief, began speaking hesitantly. "This engineer from Mike's subcontractor company made a sloppy system. When I pointed it out, Mike got angry, deleted the nearly finished system, and threatened to make me pay for it. With the deadline approaching, I had no choice but to design the program myself." Chris's blatant lies left me speechless. I stood up and loudly denied his claims. "That's a lie. Yes, I deleted the system, but it was under Chris's orders." As Johnson listened silently, Chris sneered at me. "Yeah, you deleted it. Because of you, our company is in chaos. The system I painstakingly made isn't working, and we won't meet the delivery deadline. Our credibility is in shambles." Chris dismissed the system we created as trash and boasted that he could make one himself just by typing in the text. He really didn't understand the complexities of system design. I realized that any system created in 3 days would be full of flaws. Chris, with tears in his eyes, now pleaded passionately to Johnson. "Because of these 2, our sales department has suffered significant losses. They should be held accountable immediately." Seeing Chris's desperate attitude and Johnson's stern face, I felt a strong sense of unease. I had found the client for this project to be very flexible. So, I couldn't believe that negotiations to extend the deadline had fallen apart. What kind of damage had Chris caused while designing the system? If Chris, an amateur, tried to design the system and ended up deleting much of the customer data the sales department had, and then caused the customer management system to fail, it seems the responsibility lies with Mike. What do you think? Noticing our puzzled expressions, Johnson softened his tone and asked us. Chris probably tampered with their customer management system as a model for his design. He must have damaged the important data system, resulting in defects. Our company also manages this company's customer management system. If we check the backup data and fix the system, it might work. Chris's eyes widened at my words, and his face lit up. "You should have said that earlier. I worried for nothing." Chris, back to his usual sarcastic attitude, was confronted by Joseph this time. More importantly, it wasn't our responsibility that Chris had to design the system. Please correct that. Joseph slammed his fist on the table, startling Chris. I followed Joseph's lead and explained to Johnson. Chris called our nearly finished system trash and ordered us to delete it. We had been meticulously designing the system and holding meetings with the client on Chris's behalf. We never threatened to cause damage. Chris leaned forward, arguing back at us. "There's no proof. You're just making this up, President. Don't be deceived by them." Joseph had been waiting for this and pulled a small device from his bag. He thrust it in front of Chris and shouted, "We do have proof. Since we can't afford to take notes during work, we always use a voice recorder. On the day Chris ordered the system to be deleted, this recorder was running. Let me play it for you." Chris, now pale, glanced back and forth between the device and us, unable to form words. On the day Chris pressured me to delete the system, I had anticipated he might shift the blame later, so I had Joseph check the voice recorder. Everything Chris said, from calling the system trash to demanding a refund, was recorded in his voice. As Chris's irrational and tyrannical words filled the president's office, Johnson listened, trembling with anger. "Chris, this is completely different from what you told me because of your actions. Our company is facing significant losses." Johnson, his anger finally exploding, yelled at Chris, who was now pale. "But Mike is the one who actually deleted the system." Chris mumbled excuses, seemingly unaware of his mistake. "Chris, you know about the Subcontract Act, right? Unjust returns or refusal to accept goods by the prime contractor can be reported to the Fair Trade Commission. The Subcontract Act in the US is designed to protect subcontractors, who often find themselves in a weaker position against the prime contractors. Therefore, a proper contract must be signed, and both parties must follow the rules. Chris's unilateral demand to delete the system violated the Subcontract Act. Such a violation could escalate into a lawsuit involving the entire company. With our testimony and the recorded audio, the situation is unfavorable for the prime contractor. We will report the unfair treatment we received from Chris to the appropriate authorities." At my words, Chris's face turned red with anger for a moment. But then, under Johnson's furious glare, his face went white. Chris bit his lip and trembled. "President Johnson, please look at this." Joseph quickly pulled out a copy of the contract made in Chris's name and the document detailing the subcontractor fees for this project. This was Joseph's ace in the hole to corner Chris. Johnson frowned and carefully examined the documents Joseph handed him. "We checked the subcontractor fees through our own accounting. We wanted to know the amount of damage if this project was cancelled. We found a slight discrepancy from the amount stated in the contract, so we closely examined the items and found something suspicious." Joseph noticed the payment was less than expected and focused on the fees and business coordination management costs listed by Chris. After consulting with accounting, it was explained that the management costs were incurred when coordinating business between the client and the subcontractor outside of regular working hours or on holidays. Due to deadline changes or system improvements, prime contractors sometimes need to take irregular actions, hence the management fees. However, we had never asked Chris to coordinate any tasks, nor were there any transactions that incurred fees. In other words, Chris was attempting to fraudulently deduct these fictitious tasks from the subcontractor fees. Reducing the payment amount unilaterally also violates the Subcontract Act. Can you clearly explain these tasks to President Johnson? Chris, not expecting us to dig this deep, was stunned into silence. He glared at Joseph for a moment, then slumped his shoulders in defeat and shook his head. The next moment, he threw himself at Johnson's feet, begging, "This discrepancy is my mistake. I never intended to steal any money." Seeing the usually arrogant Chris groveling on the floor, Joseph wore a look of triumph. "Chris, you're apologizing to the wrong people." Whether he ignored Johnson's advice or was too stubborn to apologize to us, Chris didn't say a word of apology in our direction. "Mike, Joseph, I sincerely apologize for Chris's actions. We'll make sure he pays for his illegal conduct." Johnson stood up from the president's seat and apologized deeply to us. His demeanor showed his willingness to take responsibility as a president. "Please, raise your head." "That's right. Let's leave the rest to the proper authorities." Chris stared at Johnson, who was apologizing with a look of disbelief. While I appreciated Johnson's handling of the situation as the company's top, I still had questions for Chris. "By the way, Chris, why did you, as a department head, take on this project yourself? Couldn't you have assigned it to a subordinate?" Chris looked like he had swallowed a bitter pill and didn't answer my question. Suddenly, Johnson started laughing, surprising not only us but also Chris. "Mike, do you know how you are regarded in our industry?" I tilted my head in confusion and looked at Joseph, who smiled and answered Johnson's question. I've heard some people call Mike a super engineer. I didn't realize President Johnson also knew this nickname. That's right. Mike is called a super engineer because he handles every project flawlessly and provides perfect aftercare. When I saw your name as the project lead, I wondered if you were the super engineer Mike. Johnson looked impressed, but I was puzzled, while Joseph grinned with delight. I didn't know I was called that, but if it's true, I'm honored. The moment I answered seriously, Chris, who had been quietly apologizing, suddenly stood up and kicked the president's desk in front of me. It's wrong for a gloomy subcontractor like you to be praised as a super engineer. Without us getting the jobs, you wouldn't have any work. Seeing Chris furious and telling me not to get carried away sent a sharp tension through my body. I remembered how Chris always made sarcastic remarks and threatened me. But I realized this was Chris's way of resisting the recognition I received in this industry. Mr. Chris, we could say the same. Without the systems we design, sales can't function, and it's our technical skills that allow you to pitch to other companies. Chris seemed to be struggling to find words to attack me, his mind nearly overloaded. Mike is right. Sales and engineering shouldn't be compared to see which is superior. They should support each other. I don't understand Chris's attitude towards Mike, but you need to change your perspective. When Johnson said this clearly, Chris looked defeated and slumped his shoulders. Chris still seemed unsatisfied, and I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. Then a hypothesis about Chris's behavior came to mind. Could it be that this project was a setup by Mr. Chris to ruin my reputation? I hoped my hypothesis was wrong, but Johnson looked as if everything made perfect sense. Chris snorted and responded with a sneering smile. I wanted to expose your true nature and change that undeserved nickname. But now that the system for this project is deleted, your reputation is in the gutter. Serves you right. Johnson and Joseph watched Chris's deranged laughter with pained expressions. I felt a surge of anger at Chris for nearly ruining this project out of personal spite. You wasted the client's system over something so petty. This might have been the first time I had raised my voice in defiance against Chris. Chris, wide-eyed in surprise, stopped his eerie laughter. I don't claim my skills are the best, but my dedication to the clients is unmatched. I can't stay silent while that commitment is disregarded. This client had poured their efforts into their salon's growth. Joseph and I had simply translated that hope into the system's design. Chris had not only abandoned his sales duties, but had also exploited the client to harass me. Such actions were intolerable, and my blood boiled with rage. Although the system was temporarily deleted, we've confirmed that the backup is intact, so there's no issue. We will complete this project responsibly. Mr. Chris should face the appropriate consequences. Suppressing my anger, I said this with a smile, and Chris gritted his teeth in frustration. Damn it, I thought it was deleted. Chris's voice, filled with hatred, echoed through the president's office as Joseph and I quickly left. Feeling refreshed, Joseph and I left Chris's company, sharing a high five and our joy. Now we needed to return to our company, restore the system, and resume testing. We also had to address the customer management system for the sales department, which Johnson had carefully requested. Let's grab a meal first. Yeah, I feel like eating something hearty. We'll need the energy. With that, we heartily devoured large bowls at a beef bowl shop by the station, and then headed back to our company. A week passed since the incident with Chris, and we were finally done fixing the system. While we quickly restored our design system, rebuilding the customer management system that Chris had destroyed was quite a challenge. We found not only typos, but also missing crucial parts of the system, which made me scream in frustration. The sales department employees were also furious with Chris, complaining about his poor work attitude and condescending behavior towards subordinates. With the employees' voices and our evidence, Chris was inevitably disciplined. Having completed the project and Johnson's request, Joseph and I are now celebrating with a toast at a beer hall. By the way, did you hear about Chris? He was demoted by President Johnson, who was furious about this incident, and then he quit the company. When we reported the matter to the Fair Trade Commission, an investigation into the prime contractor company began immediately. Joseph and I breathed a sigh of relief when we heard from accounting that the correct amount had been paid for Johnson's request. Chris's project. Well, maybe it's a blessing we weren't sued for damages. Chris, who was demoted from sales manager, was looked down upon by his subordinates and eventually left the company because he couldn't stand it. Johnson later told us that if we hadn't completed this project, Chris would have been held responsible for the damages. I heard he hasn't been able to find another job since he left the company. Despite being a sales manager, he left without any significant achievements. With his arrogant personality, finding another sales job would be difficult. 5 days later, I saw Chris walking near the employment office with vacant eyes, and I felt a sense of relief and freedom from the fear and tension he had caused me. "Hey, super engineer, we need your help with this new system," Joseph jokingly said to me as he brought in a new project. "Stop calling me that." Today, we're back at our keyboards, designing a future where everyone can be happy through this project. Together with my partner, I want to continue contributing to making USA's future brighter.
This story is titled, Older Brother Stole My Younger Brother's Fiancé, Destroyed Our Family, and Karma Finally Hit. Hey everyone. So, I'm not the type to air my personal stuff online, but this has been eating me up inside. I guess I just need to put it out there to process everything. So, my family is all about loyalty. Like, it wasn't just something our mom said to sound wise. It was our unofficial family motto. At the end of the day, all you've got is family, she'd say. And for a long time, I believed it. There were 4 of us kids. Alex, the oldest at 29, Sarah, the second at 26, me at 24, and Jake, the youngest at 22. Each of us had a role in the family, whether we chose it or not. Alex was the golden child. If you know the type, effortlessly good at everything, charming as hell, and just enough obliviousness to make you forgive his flaws. That's Alex. He was the quarterback in high school, got into a decent college without trying too hard, and always seemed to have people wrapped around his finger. But Alex's charm had its downsides. He wasn't mean or cruel, but he was selfish in that casual, clueless way that makes you feel like you're being unreasonable if you call it out. He'd eat the last slice of pizza without checking if anyone else wanted it, borrow your favorite jacket and return it stained, talk over you at dinner because his story was more interesting. Little stuff, you know? It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but it added up. Then there was Sarah, 26, the practical one. Sarah was the person who kept things together. If Alex's ego needed to be reined in, or Jake needed advice on how to deal with a professor, Sarah was the one we turned to. She had no time for drama, but somehow always got pulled into it because she hated leaving things unresolved. She had this way of making you feel like she cared without coddling you, which was great for me because I'm the one who's always been, well, a bit indecisive. I guess that's my role, the middle one trying to figure it all out. I wasn't as flashy as Alex or as grounded as Sarah. I've always been somewhere in between, doing my best to keep up with the expectations placed on me while not stepping on anyone's toes. Then there was Jake, the youngest. Jake was quiet, not shy, just observant. He was the kind of guy who wouldn't say much during a conversation, but would throw in one comment that completely nailed the situation. People underestimated him a lot, but that was a mistake. Jake was always watching, figuring out how things worked, and planning his next move. He wasn't the most confident person in the room, but he had a good heart and a sharp mind. Growing up, Mom made sure we stuck together. It didn't matter who messed up, the whole family paid for it. Missed a chore? Everyone got lectured. One bad report card? Group study sessions were enforced. We complained about it, of course, but deep down, I think we appreciated it. That structure made us feel like we were in it together. For a long time, that loyalty worked. If someone picked on Jake, Alex would step in. If Alex got too full of himself, Sarah would bring him back down to earth. And if I felt stuck, Jake would give me perspective. It wasn't perfect, what family is, but we had each other's backs, no matter what. Then things started to change, and it all began with when Jake met his girlfriend Emma. Jake and Emma's relationship started off like something out of a rom-com. At least that's how Jake described it. They met at work, and Emma was the bubbly, confident type who could make friends with anyone. Jake was quieter, more serious, but somehow they just clicked. Opposites attract, I guess. When Jake first told us about her, he couldn't stop smiling. She's amazing, he said. Funny, smart, doesn't take herself too seriously. I really think she might be the one. It was a big deal for Jake to say that because he's not the type to get swept up in feelings. He's the kind of guy who overthinks everything. But with Emma, he seemed sure. The first time Emma came over to meet the family, she fit in so well it was almost weird. You know how it can be awkward when someone new is introduced to a tight-knit group? Not with Emma. She was charming, funny. She made everyone feel at ease. Even Sarah, who's naturally skeptical of new people, warmed up to her right away. She's great, Sarah told me later. Jake's lucky to have found her. And honestly, I agreed. At the time, it seemed like Emma was exactly what Jake needed. When Alex met Emma that evening, they clicked together quickly. They had this undeniable chemistry that everyone noticed. Alex, being his usual self, tried to test her with his witty sarcasm and dry humor. Emma didn't miss a beat. She fired back with her own clever retorts, leaving Alex genuinely impressed. It was like watching a masterclass in banter. They spent half the night exchanging playful jabs, and by the end of it, even Alex had a big grin on his face. However, for a while, everything seemed perfect. Jake and Emma were inseparable, but in a healthy way. They'd spend weekends hiking, trying out new restaurants, or just hanging out at home watching movies. Jake was happier than I'd ever seen him. But as time went on, Emma, normally, started to visit the family house more often, and things started to shift. At first, it was subtle. So subtle I wondered if I was imagining it. That's when I started noticing more things. Emma and Alex seemed to have this connection. Nothing outright inappropriate, just little things. They'd laugh at inside jokes Jake didn't seem to be in on. During one of the family dinners, Emma always ended up sitting next to Alex, and their conversations were animated in a way that made the rest of us fade into the background. Jake didn't say anything at first, but I noticed the way his smile would falter when Emma and Alex were talking. I brushed it off. That's just Emma, I told myself. She's outgoing and Alex is magnetic. It doesn't mean anything. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Looking back, I realized that the cracks in our family dynamic started forming long before anyone noticed. Alex had always been self-centered, but this was different. And Jake, who had spent so much of his life idolizing Alex, was starting to see him in a new light. Then came the day Jake brought Emma to our regular Sunday family dinner. Right away, I began to sense a bigger shift. During dinner, Emma and Alex started joking about something that had happened at work. They were laughing so hard they were practically in tears, and Jake was just sitting there, smiling politely. It wasn't anything significant, but it made me uncomfortable for some reason I couldn't put my finger on. Later that evening, Sarah pulled me aside. Is it just me, or does Emma seem really friendly with Alex? She asked. I shrugged it off. They're just getting along. You know how Alex is. People are drawn to him. But Sarah gave me a look. Yeah, but Jake's her boyfriend, not Alex. I didn't have an answer for that. But since Sarah started to notice too, then obviously there is something wrong. As the weeks went by, those little moments started piling up. Emma and Alex would laugh at inside jokes Jake didn't seem to be part of. During family gatherings, Emma always seemed to gravitate toward Alex, and they'd have these animated conversations that left everyone else out. Jake didn't say anything, but I could tell he was noticing it too. One time, we were all at a barbecue at Sarah's house. Jake had gone inside to grab drinks for everyone, and I was sitting on the patio, watching Emma and Alex talk. They were standing pretty close, laughing about something. When Jake came back, Emma quickly stepped away from Alex, like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. Jake didn't say anything, but his face tightened. A few days later, Jake called me out of the blue. Hey, can I ask you something? He said, sounding hesitant. Sure, I replied, wondering what was on his mind. Do you think Emma and Alex are too close? He asked. I was caught off guard. What do you mean? Jake sighed. I don't know. It's just, sometimes it feels like they have this thing. Like I'm not even in the room when they're talking. Am I overthinking this? I didn't know what to say. On one hand, I wanted to reassure him, because I didn't want to make him feel worse. But on the other hand, I'd noticed it too. I think Emma's just outgoing, I said finally. And you know how Alex is. He has that effect on people. I'm sure it's nothing. Jake didn't sound convinced. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's been bothering me. From that point on, it was impossible not to notice. At the next family dinner, Emma and Alex were at it again, laughing, joking, and practically finishing each other's sentences. Jake was unusually quiet, just picking at his food. After dinner, he pulled me aside. You saw it, didn't you? He asked, his voice low. Saw what? I said, trying to play dumb. Come on, don't do that, he said, frustration creeping into his tone. You know what I'm talking about. The way they're acting. It's not normal. I didn't know what to say. Look, I get it, I admitted. It's weird. But maybe it's just a personality thing. Emma's outgoing and Alex is, well, Alex. Jake shook his head. I don't think so, he said quietly. Something's off. Things only got worse from there. One night, we were at a game night at Mom's house. Just us siblings and Emma. We were playing charades and Emma was up. Alex kept shouting guesses, and every time she laughed, it felt like Jake disappeared. By the end of the night, Jake looked like he was barely holding it together. When we left, Jake turned to me. I need to know if I'm crazy or if there's something going on, he said. I didn't have an answer for him. I didn't want to fill his head with suspicions, while I myself was not sure of what's happening between those two. But after what happened, I wish I'd said something sooner. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything, but at least Jake wouldn't have felt so alone. At the time, though, I kept telling myself it wasn't my place to get involved. However, as things heated up, it became clear that something was about to explode, and we were all going to feel it. After Jake confided in me about feeling uneasy with how close Emma and Alex seemed, I figured things would cool down. I mean, maybe Emma would pick up on Jake's vibe and dial back the overly friendly stuff, or Alex would get bored and move on to whatever was next in his orbit. Instead, the tension started creeping into every family interaction. It wasn't like there was one big, obvious moment where everything blew up. Not yet, at least. It was more like a series of tiny cracks forming in the foundation until the whole thing felt ready to collapse. One night, Sarah invited all of us over to her place for dinner. She was big on these sibling get-togethers. Said it was her way of keeping us grounded now that we were all adults. It was supposed to be a relaxed evening, but from the moment Emma and Alex arrived, something felt off. Jake had been quieter than usual lately, and that night was no different. He mostly stayed in the background, letting everyone else talk. Emma, on the other hand, was her usual bubbly self, cracking jokes and making conversation. And Alex was soaking it all in like he was the main character in the room, as usual. At one point, Emma and Alex ended up in the kitchen together, while the rest of us stayed in the living room. I don't know what they were talking about, but there was a lot of laughter. Too much, honestly. Jake glanced toward the kitchen a couple of times but didn't say anything. Sarah noticed too and gave me this look like, "Are you seeing this?" When they finally came back, Jake barely made eye contact with either of them. His whole mood shifted and did not talk to Emma directly for the rest of the evening. A couple of weeks later, Mom hosted one of her classic Sunday dinners. These were a big deal in our family, a tradition she insisted on, even when we all had other things going on. Normally, Jake loved these dinners. He'd joke around with Sarah, ask Mom about her garden, and actually seem relaxed for a few hours. But this time, he was so different. Emma and Alex showed up together, which wasn't unusual since Emma was practically part of the family by now. What was unusual was how they seemed to be in their own world, laughing about some stupid story Alex was telling. I didn't catch all the details, but the way they interacted felt too familiar. Jake was sitting across from them, not saying much. At one point, Emma reached over to touch Alex's arm while laughing, and I swear I saw Jake's jaw tighten. He didn't make a scene, but you could feel the tension in the air. Even Mom, who's usually oblivious to stuff like this, kept glancing between them like she was trying to figure out what was going on. The final straw came during a random weekday. I was at work when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jake. "Jake, she's gone." That was all it said. I was confused, so I immediately called him, and when he picked up, his voice was shaky. "She left," he said. "She packed up her stuff and said she's in love with Alex." I didn't know what to say. "Alex?" I asked, like I needed to hear it again to believe it. "Yeah," Jake said bitterly. "My own brother." By the time I got to Jake's place that evening, he was a wreck. The living room was a mess. Stuff scattered everywhere, like he'd been too angry to care where anything landed. A picture of him and Emma was lying face down on the floor. Jake was sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. "She didn't even try to hide it," he said when I sat down next to him. "She just said it like it wasn't a big deal. I'm in love with Alex." I didn't know what to say. "What do you want to do?" I asked finally. Jake just shook his head. "What can I do? She's gone, and Alex..." He paused, his voice shaking. "Alex isn't my brother anymore." The hurt in his eyes cut deep, and I felt my own anger rise, not just at Alex, but at the unfairness of it all. I put my arm around his shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. "Jake, I know this feels like the end of the world right now, but we're gonna get through this." I left Jake's place that night feeling like everything had changed. Our family, which had always been built on loyalty, trust, and having each other's backs, felt broken beyond repair. The fallout was just beginning, but even then, I knew things would never be the same. After Jake dropped the bomb about Emma leaving him for Alex, things in our family went from bad to worse. If I'm being honest, I think we all knew deep down something was off before this happened, but no one wanted to believe it could actually be true. I mean, who wants to admit that your brother would betray you like that? The day after Emma left, Jake didn't come to our mom's usual Sunday dinner, which was a first. He texted me that morning. "I'm not coming. Can you tell Mom?" I didn't blame him. Showing up and pretending everything was normal would have been impossible. When I told Mom Jake wasn't coming, she got that worried mom look. "What's going on?" she asked. I froze for a second. I wasn't sure if I should tell her everything, but what was the point in hiding it? "Emma left Jake," I said. "She's with Alex now." You'd think I'd told her the sky was falling. She looked completely stunned, like she couldn't process what I was saying. "What do you mean she's with Alex?" "They've been seeing each other behind Jake's back," I explained. "She told Jake she's in love with him." Mom just sat there for a moment, shaking her head. "No," she said. "Alex wouldn't do that. He wouldn't." I didn't respond. What was the point? It wasn't like I wanted to believe it either, but it was the truth. By the middle of the week, everyone in the family knew. Sarah was furious. She called me as soon as she heard. "What the hell is wrong with Alex?" she fumed. "Jake's his brother. How could he do something so disgusting?" I didn't have an answer. I mean, what do you even say to that? Dad, on the other hand, didn't waste time. He called Alex directly. I wasn't there for the call, but Jake told me Dad didn't hold back. "You're no son of mine," he said, before slamming the phone down. Dad's always been the kind of guy who believes in loyalty above all else, and this crossed every line imaginable. Sarah decided to confront Alex too. She called him once, let him have it, and then blocked his number. She didn't want anything to do with him after that. But Mom was different. She couldn't bring herself to cut Alex off. "She's still my son," she kept saying, as if that made everything okay. Jake was staying at my place by then, because he couldn't handle being in the house he'd shared with Emma. One night, Mom called and asked if I could get Jake to talk to her. "He won't answer my calls," she said. "I just want to make sure he's okay." When I brought it up to Jake, he shook his head. "I can't deal with her right now," he said. "She's just going to try to defend Alex, and I don't want to hear it." I didn't push him. Honestly, I couldn't blame him. A couple of weeks later, Mom invited us all over for dinner, saying she wanted to talk about moving forward as a family. Jake refused to go, but I decided to show up just to see what she had to say. When I walked into the dining room, I saw Alex sitting there. I almost turned around and left. I couldn't believe Mom had invited him without telling anyone. Sarah showed up a few minutes later, saw Alex, and immediately started yelling. "Are you serious, Mom? You think we're just going to sit here and play happy family with him after what he did?" Mom tried to calm her down, saying something about forgiveness and how we needed to stay united as a family. But Sarah wasn't having it. "He destroyed Jake," she shouted, "and you're acting like it's no big deal." Alex just sat there, not saying a word. I don't know if he was ashamed or if he just didn't care enough to defend himself. Either way, it made me sick. Sarah stormed out, and I followed her. "You coming?" she asked as she headed to her car. "Yeah," I said. "I can't sit in there with him." After that disaster of a dinner, things got even more strained. Jake stopped talking to Mom entirely. "She made her choice," he told me. "She chose Alex over me." Sarah and I still talked to Mom, but every conversation turned into an argument. "He's your brother," she'd say whenever we brought up Alex. "No," I told her one day. "A real brother wouldn't do what he did. He's on his own now." Then, out of nowhere, the news of Alex and Emma getting engaged came. They actually had the audacity to send out wedding invitations to the entire family, like everything was fine. But none of us went. Not me, not Jake, not Sarah, and definitely not Dad. Mom, of course, went to the wedding. She even posted pictures on Facebook, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. When Jake saw them, he just shook his head. "She's lost it," he said. Sarah was angrier. "She's acting like nothing happened," she said. "It's disgusting." After the wedding, it felt like Alex and Emma were trying to pretend the rest of us didn't exist. They posted their perfect life all over social media. Pictures of their new house, vacation photos, gushy anniversary posts. But the rest of us? We pretended they didn't exist either. As for Jake, despite everything, he's not the type to seek confrontation or cause harm. He's hurt and angry, sure. But deep down, I think he's just trying to make sense of it all and move on with his life. I don't think he'll ever confront Alex directly or do anything drastic. That's just not who he is. Instead, he's focusing on healing and rebuilding his life without Emma. It's been a tough journey, but I believe in Jake. He's resilient, and while the scars of betrayal will always be there, he's finding strength in his own way. It's been tough, but we're slowly finding our way without them. Family gatherings are different now, quieter, but we're sticking together. I wish I could say things are back to normal, but the truth is, it's a new kind of normal. I'll keep you all posted on how things unfold. There's bound to be more drama down the line, and who knows, maybe some reconciliation too. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. Stay tuned for updates. Update 1. All right, here's the update I promised. Things have been quiet for a while on the Alex and Emma front. Or at least that's what I thought. None of us really kept tabs on them after the wedding. We'd cut them off entirely. Jake was rebuilding his life, Sarah was focused on her career, and Dad wouldn't even let Alex's name come up in conversation. Mom was the only one still keeping in touch with him, but even she avoided bringing him up too much around the rest of us. Then, out of nowhere, Mom called me one evening. Her voice was shaky, like she was on the verge of tears. "Alex needs us," she said. Now, I wasn't in the mood to play therapist for Alex, so I almost ignored her, but something about her tone made me curious. "What happened?" I asked, already bracing myself for some ridiculous drama. "It's Emma," she said, her voice trembling. "He caught her cheating." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Yeah, I know it wasn't the most mature reaction, but come on. The irony of it all was too much. "With who?" I asked, already half expecting her answer. "His best friend," she said, sounding horrified. I nearly dropped my phone. Wait, what? Apparently, Alex had walked in on Emma and his best friend, let's call him Chris, while they were in the middle of something. He confronted them, and Emma didn't even try to deny it. She told him she'd been unhappy for a while and that she and Chris had a connection. Hearing this was like a cruelest joke ever. I mean, Alex destroyed Jake's life for Emma, only to have her turn around and do the same thing to him. If karma exists, this had to be it. When I told Jake about it, he just shrugged. "Figures," he said. I was surprised by how calm he was. "Doesn't it make you feel better, knowing he's getting a taste of his own medicine?" I asked. Jake thought about it for a second, then shook his head. "Not really. It doesn't change what he did to me." That hit me hard. Jake wasn't bitter or angry anymore. He was just done. Alex didn't matter to him anymore. It was like he'd closed that chapter and moved on, and honestly, I was proud of him for that. Sarah, on the other hand, had plenty to say when I told her. "Serves him right," she said, laughing. "I hope it hurts as much as it hurt Jake." Even Dad, who rarely said much about Alex these days, weighed in. "That boy made his choices," he said. "Now he has to live with them." Mom, predictably, was trying to rally the family around Alex. "He's heartbroken," she told me. "We need to support him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Support him? After what he did to Jake," I snapped. "She made a mistake," she said, using her go-to excuse for Alex's behavior. "No, Mom," I said firmly. "A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. This question mark. This was a deliberate choice, over and over again. He doesn't get a free pass just because he's your son." Alex started calling me after everything went down, but I ignored his calls. I didn't want to hear his sob story. I mean, what was I supposed to say? "Sorry your life fell apart, but you kind of brought it on yourself?" Jake told me Alex tried reaching out to him too, but he blocked his number immediately. "I don't want to hear it," Jake said. He made his bed. Meanwhile, Mom kept trying to push for some kind of family reunion. She even suggested having Alex over for Sunday dinner, which went over about as well as you'd expect. "Are you serious?" Sarah said when Mom brought it up. "Do you think Jake's going to sit across from Alex at the table and pretend everything's fine? Because that's not happening." Mom sighed. "He's still your brother," she said, as if that was supposed to magically fix everything. "No," Sarah replied coldly. "He's not." As for Alex and Emma, it didn't take long for their perfect little life to crumble. Emma moved in with Chris almost immediately after Alex found out about the affair. They didn't even try to keep things low-key, posting pictures on social media like they hadn't left a trail of destruction behind them. Alex, from what I heard through Mom, was a complete wreck. He'd been staying with a friend, trying to figure out what to do next. Mom said he cried when he told her about everything, saying he didn't know how things had gone so wrong. I didn't have the heart to tell her it was pretty obvious how things had gone wrong. Alex had destroyed his family for Emma, and now he was paying the price. At this point, none of us felt sorry for Alex. Not Jake, not Sarah, not me, and definitely not Dad. Mom was the only one still holding on to the idea that we could somehow come back from all of this, but the rest of us had moved on. Jake started focusing on himself and his future. Sarah threw herself into her career and barely mentioned Alex anymore. Dad? He found peace in cutting Alex out entirely. As for me, I finally stopped feeling like I had to play mediator. I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine anymore. Alex made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. That's the latest. If you think this is the end of the story, you might be right, or maybe not. Either way, I'm glad I don't have to deal with their drama anymore. Final update. All right, guys. Here's the final update, or at least I think it is. After a few months from my last update, things have taken a turn, and I honestly didn't see it coming. You'd think after everything that's happened, we'd all just go our separate ways and let the mess settle. But no, life had a little more chaos in store. So, after the whole Emma and Chris situation blew up, Alex went into full-on damage control. He kept messaging all of us, me, Sarah, and even Jake, trying to explain himself, but none of us replied. Then came the twist I didn't expect. Chris dumped Emma. Yup, the guy she left Alex for kicked her to the curb a few weeks after they moved in together. From what Mom told me, because of course she was still talking to Emma, Chris wasn't ready for a serious commitment. I guess stealing another man's fiancée wasn't enough excitement for him. Emma apparently tried to go back to Alex after that. She called him, crying and saying she made a mistake. I don't know which mistake she meant since she has too many. But Alex, shockingly, didn't take her back. She betrayed me, he told Mom. I can't trust her anymore. It's ironic, isn't it? The woman Alex destroyed his family for ended up doing to him what he did to Jake. If I weren't so annoyed with the whole situation, I might have laughed. Here's where things get even messier. Mom, bless her heart, decided this was the perfect time to push for reconciliation. She called me one night, all excited, and said, Alex wants to talk to Jake. He's ready to apologize and make things right. I almost dropped my phone. Mom, are you serious? Jake doesn't want to hear from Alex. He's moved on. He's still his brother, she said, like that magically erased everything Alex had done. I told her to drop it, but of course she didn't listen. Instead, she tried to stage an intervention. She invited Jake over to her house without telling him Alex would be there. Jake showed up, thinking it was just a normal visit, only to find Alex sitting at the kitchen table. From what Jake told me later, it took everything in him not to turn around and walk out immediately. What's he doing here? Jake asked, glaring at Mom. I just thought you two could talk, Mom said, her voice all hopeful and annoying. There's nothing to talk about, Jake said. Alex, to his credit, tried to apologize. He said all the right things. How he was sorry for hurting Jake, how he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, how he'd give anything to take it back. But Jake wasn't having it. You didn't just hurt me, he said. You destroyed our family. You made your choice, Alex. Live with it. And with that, he walked out. When Jake told me about it, I could tell he was still upset, not because he regretted what he said, but because Mom had put him in that position. I can't believe she did that to me, he said. She's supposed to have my back. I didn't have much to say. I mean, I agreed with him. Mom's constant need to fix things has only made everything worse. As for Alex, I haven't heard much from him since then. From what Mom says, he's been trying to work on himself, whatever that means. He's still living alone, still trying to rebuild his life after Emma. Jake, on the other hand, is doing better than I've seen him in years. He's back at the gym, hanging out with friends, and even started seeing someone new. He's not rushing into anything serious, but he seems genuinely happy for the first time in a long time. Sarah's thriving too. She's been focused on her career and doesn't waste any energy on Alex or Emma anymore. They're not my problem, she says every time Mom brings them up. Dad? He's stayed out of all of it. He hasn't spoken to Alex since the fallout, and I doubt he ever will. For him, family loyalty is sacred, and Alex broke that in the worst way possible. As for me, I'm just glad it's all behind us. I don't feel the need to keep tabs on Alex or wonder what's going on in his life. He made his choices, and we all had to live with the consequences. But now we're moving forward, one step at a time. So, yeah, that's where things stand. Alex is out of our lives, and honestly, we're all better off for it. That's the final update. Thanks for sticking with me through this mess. Here's hoping the next chapter of life is a little less dramatic.
My name's Judy. I'm an architect by trade, and for years, that's all I cared about. Big buildings, fancy complexes, you name it, I designed it. And let me tell you, the money was good. Real good. I was all about my career, you know? Climbing that ladder, making a name for myself. And I did it, too. By the time I hit my mid-30s, I was at the top of my game. But something was missing. One day, I'm sitting in my fancy office, looking out over the city skyline I helped shape, and it hit me. I wanted a family, kids, a husband, the whole shebang. So there I was, 35 years old, and suddenly on the hunt for Mr. Right. And wouldn't you know it, I found him. We got married pretty quick. Tom, he was different from the guys I usually went for. He wasn't all about the money or the status. He was just real. One night, we're sitting on our tiny apartment balcony, sharing a bottle of cheap wine, when Tom turns to me and says, "Hey, Jude." Yeah, he called me that, like the Beatles song, "Why don't you design us a house? Your dream house. We'll get some builders, make it happen. Design our own house?" It was like he'd read my mind. I'd spent years designing other people's dreams, but never my own. I was all over that idea like white on rice. so I got to work. Sketches, plans, 3D models, the works. We built that house, and it was everything I'd ever dreamed of. Open plan living area, huge windows to let in all that natural light, a kitchen that would make a celebrity chef jealous. It was us, in brick and mortar form. I was so proud of that house, I sent some photos to this fancy design magazine. Next thing I know, they're calling it the house of the year. Can you believe that? My house, our house, the best of the year. Life was good, you know? We had our dream house, our careers were going great. But something was still missing. We wanted a kid. We tried everything, tracking my cycle, special diets, you name it. Nothing. So we started with the doctors. Tests, and even more tests. But they all said the same thing, we were fine. We talked about other options. Adoption, IVF, all that stuff. But it didn't feel right for us. We decided if it happened, it happened. If not, well, we had each other, right? So we tried to move on. Focused on our careers, on each other. We traveled, we entertained, we lived. Little did I know, life was about to throw us another curveball. One that would change everything. It started with Tom feeling a bit off. Nothing major, just tired all the time, no appetite. We figured it was stress from work or something. But it didn't go away. We finally went to the doctor. I remember sitting in that sterile white room, holding Tom's hand as the doc came in. The look on his face. I knew it wasn't good news. Stomach cancer. Advanced. Those words hit like a freight train. From that moment on, our lives became a whirlwind of hospitals, doctors, and treatments. I threw myself into it, researching every possible cure, every experimental treatment. We traveled to the best clinics, spent a fortune on medicines. But cancer, it's a sneaky bastard. No matter what we tried, Tom just kept getting worse. I watched the man I loved, this strong, vibrant guy, waste away before my eyes. It was like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The end came faster than we expected. 1 minute he was there, squeezing my hand, telling me it would be okay. The next, he was gone. I was lost. Completely and utterly lost. The house that we'd built together, our dream home, it felt empty now. I tried to keep it together, I really did. But I was falling apart. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Work became impossible. I'd stare at blueprints for hours and not see a thing. My colleagues were worried, I could tell. But what could they do? What could anyone do? About a month after the funeral, I started feeling sick. Really sick. Couldn't keep anything down, not even water. At first, I thought it was just stress, you know? Grief does weird things to your body. But then this crazy thought hit me. What if I had cancer too? I know it sounds nuts. I mean, logically, I knew stomach cancer wasn't contagious. But grief isn't logical, is it? I panicked. Drove myself to the ER in the middle of the night, convinced I was dying. The doctors there, bless them, they were patient with me. Ran a bunch of tests to calm me down. And then the doc came in with the results. I braced myself for the worst. But instead, she smiled at me. Congratulations, she said. You're pregnant. Pregnant. After all those years of trying, after losing Tom, after everything. I was pregnant. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So I did both. Right there in the ER, surrounded by beeping machines and worried nurses, I laughed and cried like a crazy person. As I drove home that night, my hand on my still flat stomach, I made a promise. To myself, to Tom, to this little life growing inside me. I was going to be the best damn mom I could be. The pregnancy hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, I'd heard stories about morning sickness and all that, but this? This was something else entirely. I could barely drag myself out of bed most days, let alone work on complex architectural projects. My boss, Jake, he tried to be understanding at first. "Take it easy, Judy," he'd say. "We've got you covered." But as the weeks dragged on and I kept missing deadlines, I could see the frustration in his eyes. One day, he called me into his office. I knew what was coming. "Judy," he said, leaning back in his chair, "we can't keep giving you the big projects if you can't deliver. I'm thinking we should move you to remote work, maybe scale back your responsibilities." I threw myself a pity party that night. Sat on the couch Tom and I had picked out together, eating ice cream straight from the tub and crying my eyes out. But then, I felt it. This tiny flutter in my belly. And just like that, I knew. This child, this little miracle growing inside me, was more important than any building I could ever design. More important than any career. The next day, I started looking for a new job. Something closer to home, something that wouldn't stress me out so much. I found a small construction company, just a few blocks from my house. The pay was, well, let's just say it was a far cry from what I was used to. But they were willing to work with my schedule, to be flexible with doctor's appointments and all that. I took the job, and you know what? It was the best decision I could have made. The months flew by. When the big day finally came, I swear I could feel Tom there with me. Cheering me on, telling me I could do this. And I did. After what felt like a lifetime of pain and pushing, their perfect little human was. As I held him for the first time, this wave of love washed over me. It was like nothing I'd ever felt before. Stronger than anything. In that moment, I knew I'd do anything for this little guy. Anything at all. I named him Thomas, after his dad. Tommy for short. And as I looked down at his sleeping face, I made another promise. I was going to give this kid the best life I possibly could. No matter what it took. The years flew by like pages in a flipbook. Before I knew it, Tommy was starting school, then middle school, then high school. And let me tell you, that kid was something else. Smart as a whip and athletic to boot. He'd come home with straight A's and trophies from track meets, grinning from ear to ear. "Look, Mom," he'd say, waving his report card or medal. "I did it." And every time, my heart would swell with pride. We didn't have much, but we had enough. A roof over our heads, food on the table, and each other. What more did we need? I made sure to be home when Tommy got back from school, to help with homework, to cheer him on at his meets. No late nights at the office for me, no sir. Tommy was my priority now. High school graduation came and went in a blink. Tommy, cap on his head and diploma in hand, beaming at me from the stage. I cried like a baby, of course. Couldn't help it. My little boy was all grown up. Then came college. Tommy got into a great school in another city. I was so proud of him, but man, it was hard to let him go. The house felt emptier than ever without him around. But you know what? It also gave me a chance to focus on myself again. I threw myself back into work, took on bigger projects. The money started flowing in again, and it felt good. I could help Tommy with his tuition, send him some extra cash for books and stuff. Every weekend, I'd hop in the car and drive to see him. We'd grab lunch, catch a movie, just hang out. It was different, sure, but it was still us. Still good. After graduation, Tommy decided to stay in the city. Got himself a good job and everything. I was happy for him, really I was. But a part of me missed having him close by. A few years went by like that. Me working hard, Tommy building his life in the city. Then one day, he called me up, sounding all excited. "Mom, I've met someone," he said. "Her name's Sarah. She's amazing, Mom. I think she might be the one." I was thrilled for him, of course. All I ever wanted was for Tommy to be happy. And from what he told me, this Sarah sounded perfect. Smart, beautiful, from a good family. Tommy was head over heels. But then things started to change. Tommy called me up one day, out of the blue. Hey, Mom, he said, sounding a bit sheepish. I was wondering, could you maybe help me out with buying a car? And, maybe send a bit more money each month? I want to take Sarah out, buy her nice things, you know? I felt my heart sink a little. This wasn't like Tommy at all. He'd always been so responsible with money. Honey, I said, trying to keep my voice gentle, you know I'd do anything for you. But a car? And extra money for gifts? That's a lot to ask. You've got a good job. Why can't you save up for these things yourself? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Tommy spoke again, his voice was cold. I thought you'd understand, he said. I thought you'd want me to be happy. But I guess I was wrong. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling like I'd just been slapped. After that, things were different. Tommy didn't call as often. When he did, our conversations were short, stilted. It felt like there was this wall between us now, all because I wouldn't buy him a car or fund his lavish dates. I tried to tell myself it was just a phase. That Tommy would come around, realize that love wasn't about fancy cars or expensive gifts. But as the weeks turned into months, and the phone calls got fewer and farther between, I couldn't help but worry. A year passed in a blink. Then one day, out of the blue, Tommy showed up on my doorstep. He wasn't alone. Mom, he said, grinning from ear to ear. I want you to meet Sarah. We're getting married. Sarah was everything Tommy had described, pretty, polite, the works. But there was something off. The way she looked at me, it was like I was some quaint little curiosity. Still, I plastered on a smile and welcomed them in. Oh, what a lovely home, Sarah exclaimed, her eyes roving over every inch of the place. It's so charming and comfortable. They stayed for dinner, chattering about wedding plans. Sarah's parents were footing the bill, apparently. As they talked, I couldn't help but notice how different Tommy seemed. Gone was my down-to-earth boy. In his place was this stranger, all flash and no substance. The wedding was, well, it was something else. More like a coronation than a marriage ceremony. I felt like a fish out of water, surrounded by all these fancy folks in their designer duds. Tommy barely had time to say hello, too busy schmoozing with Sarah's family and friends. After that, I threw myself into work. Took on big projects, worked longer hours. The money started piling up, and I had this crazy idea. I'd design a house for Tommy and Sarah, build it from the ground up. A wedding gift, you know? But something held me back. I decided to wait, see how things played out. Months went by. Then one day, Tommy and Sarah showed up again. Mom, Tommy said, we've been thinking. This house is too big for you alone. Why don't we move in? Keep you company? I was over the moon. I helped them move in, rearranged things to make room. It felt good, having life in the house again. But that feeling didn't last long. A month in, and Sarah started throwing her weight around. Ordering me around in my own kitchen, demanding fancy meals and expensive wines. Look, I said one day, trying to keep my cool, this is still my house. I appreciate you being here, but... Sarah cut me off with a shriek. Tommy, did you hear how she spoke to me? And to my shock, Tommy yelled at me. At me, his own mother. After that, things got real cold. They barely spoke to me, like I was some kind of ghost haunting my own home. Then one night, I overheard them talking. We need to get rid of her, Sarah was saying. This house is wasted on her. Yeah, Tommy replied, and my heart nearly stopped. Mom's had her time. Maybe we should look into nursing homes. I couldn't believe my ears. My own son, plotting to throw me out of my home? The home I'd designed, that I'd raised him in? I stepped around the corner, fury boiling in my veins. How dare you, I spat. Tommy looked shocked, then guilty. But one glance at Sarah, and his face hardened. Mom, he said, his voice cold, I think it's time for you to leave. That was it, the last straw. Leave? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh no, sweetheart. This is my house, my name on the deed. If anyone's leaving, it's you too. Tommy's face went red. But Mom. No buts, I cut him off. Pack your bags. Both of you. They tried to argue, but I stood firm. This was my house, damn it. As I watched them drive away, bags piled in the back of their fancy car, I felt empty. How had it come to this? Where had I gone wrong? The calm after the storm didn't last long. My phone started ringing off the hook, Tommy's name flashing on the screen every time. At first, I ignored it. But eventually, I picked up. Mom, Tommy's voice was cold, calculated. We need to talk about the house. It's half mine. By law. Dad left it to me too. I felt my blood pressure rising. That's not true, Tommy. Your father left everything to me. Well, I'm challenging that. I want half the value of the house. It's my right as Dad's son. He hung up on me, just like that. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling like the world was spinning out of control. I'd been planning to build them a house, for crying out loud. A wedding gift, a fresh start. But now I didn't want to give them a damn thing. I called up Jack, Tom's old friend from law school. Explained the situation, my voice shaking. Judy, Jack said, his voice calm and reassuring. You're in the clear legally. Tom's will left everything to you. No contest. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But Jack wasn't done. However, he continued. If Tommy decides to sue, well, it could get messy. Expensive. And drawn out. I spent the next few weeks in a daze. I kept hoping Tommy would come to his senses, that his conscience would kick in. But the phone calls kept coming, each one more demanding than the last. Then, one morning, I woke up to a commotion outside. I peeked out the window and felt my heart stop. There, on my front lawn, was a giant for sale sign. I ran outside in my robe, not caring what the neighbors thought. And boy, were they curious. Judy, you selling the place? Mrs. Peterson from next door called out. Moving to be closer to your son? Mr. Johnson asked, pausing his morning jog. I stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. What could I say? That my son was trying to force me out of my own home? I tried calling Tommy, my fingers shaking as I dialed. Straight to voicemail. With a grunt of frustration, I yanked the sign out of the ground. It came up easier than I expected, nearly sending me tumbling backward. I dragged it into the garage, out of sight. Back in the house, I sank onto the couch, the same one where Tom and I used to sit, where I'd nursed Tommy as a baby. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't cry. I was Judy Goddamn Miller. I'd designed skyscrapers, for Pete's sake. I'd raised a child on my own. I'd faced worse than this. I was trying to relax that evening, curled up on the couch with a book I couldn't focus on, when I heard the front door open. My heart leapt. Was it Tommy, coming to his senses? But the voices I heard weren't just Tommy's. There were strangers in my house. I got up, my legs shaky, and made my way to the foyer. And there they were, Tommy, Sarah, and a couple I'd never seen before, all standing in my entryway like they owned the place. And this is the living room, Tommy was saying, gesturing grandly. Original hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows. The couple was nodding, looking impressed. It's stunning, the woman said. We'll take it. When can we move in? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Excuse me, I said, my voice quavering. This house is not for sale. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave. Tommy's face twisted into something ugly. He turned to the couple and said, loudly, Don't mind her. She's not well. Dementia, you know. Sad, really. I felt like I'd been slapped. Tommy, I gasped. How dare you? But he talked over me, continuing his tour like I wasn't even there. My hands shaking, I grabbed my phone. "I'm calling the police," I announced. "All of you, out. Now." The couple looked uncertain, glancing between me and Tommy. Finally, they mumbled some excuses and headed for the door. As they left, Sarah turned to me, her eyes cold. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll never see Tommy again. Or your grandchild." That's when I noticed it, the slight swell of her belly under her designer blouse. My grandchild. I was going to be a grandmother. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I barely noticed them leaving, the door slamming behind them. The next few months were a blur of courtrooms and sleepless nights. Tommy and Sarah, bankrolled by her parents, hired a team of slick lawyers. They threw everything they had at me, claims of mental incompetence, accusations of abuse against Tommy, you name it. I was exhausted. Bone deep, soul-crushing exhausted. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Eventually, I had to quit my job, I just couldn't keep up anymore. One afternoon, as I was bringing in the mail, more legal documents, of course, my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, came over. "Judy," she said, her kind face creased with concern. "Have you thought about going public with this? You know, telling your story on TV? Sometimes, sunlight is the best disinfectant." I brushed her off, it felt wrong, somehow, to air our dirty laundry in public. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Listen, you old fool," Tommy's voice crackled over the line. "Just give up already. You're embarrassing yourself." Something in me snapped. The next day, I called the local news station. It was time to tell my story. The TV interview aired, and for a few days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, old friends, even a few lawyers offering their services. I ignored them all. I was tired, so tired. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, ready for another reporter, but instead found myself face to face with Sarah's parents. My heart sank. This was it, I thought. They're here to finish what Tommy and Sarah started. But to my shock, they looked ashamed. "Judy," Sarah's mother said, her voice barely above a whisper, we had no idea. We're so sorry." They came in, and over coffee, the whole story came out. They'd seen the TV interview, learned for the first time what their daughter and Tommy had been up to. The lawsuit, the attempts to sell my house, all of it. "We spoiled Sarah," her father admitted, shaking his head. "And now, well, she's always asking for money." They told me how they'd bought Tommy and Sarah an apartment. But Sarah had demanded a house instead. She said she'd handle it herself, her mother said, dabbing at her eyes. We had no idea this is what she meant. I sat there, stunned. I was going to build them a house," I said, my voice cracking. "As a wedding gift. But after all this, I just can't." Sarah's parents nodded, understanding in their eyes. "We're cutting them off," her father said firmly. "No more money. Not for lawyers, not for anything." True to their word, they did just that. Without the financial backing, Tommy and Sarah's case fell apart. The lawsuit was dismissed, and just like that, it was over. Months passed. I heard through the grapevine that Sarah had given birth to a little girl. The thought made my heart ache. More time went by. I threw myself back into work, trying to rebuild the life that had been put on hold. Then one day, out of the blue, there was a tap on the door. It was Tommy. The moment I opened, he burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I was selfish and stupid, and... God, Mom, I had no idea how hard it was to be a parent. What you went through, raising me alone." I stood there, watching my son cry, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to untangle. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said finally. "What you did, it's going to take time to get past that. But I'd like to meet my granddaughter." We worked out an arrangement. I'd babysit sometimes, buy clothes and toys for the baby. It was a start. The first time I held little Emma, I felt my heart melt. She had Tommy's eyes, my nose. She was perfect. Over time, things, well, they didn't go back to normal. I don't think they ever could. But they got better. Sarah became less demanding, even thanked me once for my help. Tommy, he was trying. Really trying. Do I forgive him? I don't know. Some days, when I'm playing with Emma, seeing Tommy's smile in hers, I think maybe I can. Other days, when the memory of what he did hits me, it feels impossible. But you know what? I'm not focusing on that right now. I'm just living, day by day. Enjoying my work, my home, my granddaughter. The future? Well, that'll sort itself out in time.